Hi there. Um, this is a session where we're going to talk a little bit about domestic infant adoption. My name is Betsy Hochberg. I'm the Director of Adoption Resources, which is the adoption agency of Jewish Family and Children's Services of Greater Boston, which is a non-sectarian agency. Our program is open to everyone. I have been doing this for about 20 years. I'm a clinical social worker, and I'm also an adoptive parent. And I often think that my best training for my job is my role as an adoptive parent. So I'm happy to talk to you this morning. I think it's in the morning. Maybe it's in the afternoon. I'm happy to talk to you this morning about the process of domestic infant adoption through a private agency. So in Massachusetts, and I know some of you are Massachusetts, some of you are in other parts of New England, but all of us in Massachusetts are required to be licensed in the state nonprofit agencies, and that is what we are. So the first step for any kind of an adoption is a home study. And I will talk a little bit about a home study. Actually, before I do that, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about the children that are placed through private agencies. Sometimes people come and say to me, gee, you know, we would be open to a 2-year-old or a toddler. Those children are not typically placed through private agencies. Private agencies like mine only place children who are being voluntarily relinquished by their birth parents. Typically in this country, if a woman brings a baby home, she does and runs into difficulties, she does not think, gee, maybe I'll relinquish this baby for adoption. Typically what would be what we would see more often is that she would be struggling and she would reach out to a family member, maybe her mother, maybe her sister, someone to help her care for her child. And if she ran into a great deal of difficulty, then the state would hear about it and they would step in. And those are the children that are waiting children and available through the state. And in Massachusetts, it's DCF. So private agencies are typically working with expectant moms, making adoption plans. And when that baby arrives, that is a voluntary relinquishment by the biological parents. So they are choosing to place that newborn. In all the years I've done this, the number of cases where I've seen parents bring home a newborn and then choose voluntary placement, I think I can count on one hand. So it's very unusual. So the first step for adopting parents is a home study. So you would choose an agency, and there are a number of agencies in Massachusetts and in every state. So you would need to find someone in your home state to help you with the home study. And the home study it's kind of a misnomer because it does not really have anything to do, well, it has very little to do with your home. It's really a study of you. It is a series of meetings with a social worker. Some of the meetings will take place in your home. Some of them might take place in the social worker's office, or maybe all of them will take place in your home. With COVID, things have been a little bit different. We've done more Zoom meetings. I think everybody's doing more virtual meetings, but at least one meeting has got to be in your home, and that's because of safety concerns. But the home study, as I said, it's not really about your home, it's about you. So it's a conversation. We want to really know you well. Your social worker is going to ask you all kinds of questions about yourself. Each of you, if you're in a couple, each of you will have an individual meeting and the other 3 meetings will be together. So we're going to ask you questions about your family of origin, how you met your partner if you have one, how you chose your profession, what are your family traditions that you look forward to continuing, what do you think you'll like to do differently? Maybe you're already parenting, so what has that been like for you, and how do you feel about adding another child through adoption? So you will educate us about who you are, and so that we can write a home study that really is reflective of who you are. So you're educating us, and then we're also going to be educating you. So your social worker would be very likely speaking to you about open adoption. What does that look like? And educating you around the benefits of that, whether that's something that you're open to. You might talk about transracial adoption. You might be a family that's open to adopting a child of a different race. And your social worker might be talking to you about your community and your extended family, and um, whether you're prepared and ready to take on a child of a different race. And how do you might also talk about how are you going to prepare at your work for a process which is extremely unpredictable. So all of these things would be part of the conversation. And while those meetings are taking place, which could be done in 4 consecutive weeks, and often they are done in 4 consecutive weeks, while those meetings are taking place, you're going to be gathering a slew of documents. So, and if you talk to other home study agencies, you're going to hear the same thing, because much of what is gathered in the home study is actually in the regulations. So these are things that we must have. So we're going to be looking for birth certificate, marriage certificates, divorce decrees. Everybody's going to see their physician, and we want to know, we don't expect anybody to be in perfect health. We know a lot of people come to adoption for medical reasons, but we want to know that your doctor supports the idea of you parenting, and we're hopeful that you're healthy enough to parent a child. We're going to look for tax returns. We're asking for 3. Well, every agency does this a little bit differently. Some agencies want 4, some agencies want 3, but we want letters of reference, people who know you well and can speak to, maybe you're a godparent for their children, or maybe they've known you for, many, many years. So they're going to speak to your character, really, and how well you will manage parenting. And then also, and I think this has been the thing that slowed home studies down, are clearances. In Massachusetts, we're doing 3 local criminal background checks, including, a sexual abuse registry. And then we're also required to do FBI fingerprinting. So those can sometimes slow us down. So sometimes people say to me, well, can I do a home study in a month? Well, we could do the meetings in a month, but often it takes longer than that to get all your documents in. So when all of your documents are in, and when your meetings have taken place, then the home study will actually be written. Most agencies will give you the home study to read before it's printed. We want to make sure that we've got everything accurately, and that you feel that we're representing you accurately. And these are typically 10 to 15 pages long, very detailed information about you, your finances, if you come to adoption after infertility, what your motivation for adoption is. All of those things are going to be in the home study. And so once the home study is done, then you can be approved to adopt a child. If you are a Massachusetts resident, there is also a regulation requiring that you have an additional, beyond the home study, an additional 10 hours of what we call pre-adoption education. And this can be, infant care, it can be transracial adoption, it can be a variety of different things, but you're required to have 10 hours, each of you, if you're a couple. So I'm going to do a little plug here. At Adoption Resources, we have a really great workshop that we do several times a year, and you don't have to be our clients, and you don't even have to have decided you're doing adoption. It is a really important workshop. It is entitled Evaluating Medical Risk in Domestic Infant Adoption, and it's offered by a developmental pediatrician from Children's Hospital named Lisa Prock. She gives a great 2-hour talk. She talks about what are the medical risks that we're seeing now. And I will tell you that, maybe half, maybe even a little bit more than half of the cases that you're going to hear about if you're in the adoption process are probably going to have some issue, some medical issue that you're either unfamiliar with, or maybe you want more information about. But she gives a great talk, and she'll talk about the long range effects of, for instance, a birth mother who's on an antidepressant, stays on it throughout the pregnancy. What about a birth mother who's on methadone? What's the inheritability of bipolar illness if one of the birth parents has a psychiatric illness? What about any ADHD? How inheritable is that? So all of those things she will cover on her talk. So I would, anyone who's interested, reach out to Adoption Resources. We'll send you the flyer, and if you're free and you want to sit in on that talk, we welcome you, and you will, even if you decide to go forward with adoption, you can take that 2 hours of education wherever you go, to any agency. So you will get 10 hours of education, and then you need to find a way to connect with expectant parents. So you may have gone online and seen some of these big adoption service providers that post what we call family profiles online. And you can actually, if you're an expectant mom and you are searching for adoption options, we've discovered that even women who are homeless often have smartphones. They will use their smartphone to find an agency. And some agencies choose to post families online, so that you could be a woman in northern Maine. You could look on your phone and see that this such and such an agency has a family that looks wonderful to you, and you might call them or text them and ask to learn more. So the internet has really, in the time I've been doing this, the internet has really changed adoption, so that many matches, we call them matches, when a birth and adoptive family connect, many matches do happen through the internet. So you will find either your agency that did your home study will help you to locate a resource that will be working with expectant parents, and they will help expectant parents locate an appropriate family. So one of the things that goes into the home study is a very detailed description of who the child is that you're hoping to adopt. Who is the child that you hope will join your family? And by that, I mean, it could be race. It could be, maybe you have a gender preference. It could be you have some openness around some of the medical risk issues that you're going to hear about in that medical workshop. Maybe you're not open to, opioid exposure, but maybe you are, because you've learned, some things about long-term outcomes for those children. But all of that information is going to be in your home study. Home studies are not read by birth parents. They are required by the state, indicating that we've approved you. But also, if your child is not born in your home state, and for most of you in New England, your children will not be born in New England. So that home study goes to whoever the service provider is, be it a lawyer or an agency in the state in which your child is born. So I know Massachusetts best because that's where I've been working. So we do not have a lot of women in Massachusetts choosing voluntary placement of their children. And in fact, I would say throughout New England, we do not see a lot of that. However, there are states where many women are choosing adoption, and those are the states where families tend to travel. So Florida, Texas, certain urban pockets in the Midwest. We used to say that the driver for international adoption was poverty and the driver for domestic adoption was social pressure, but we do not, now we say the driver for domestic adoption is also poverty. So the places where you see most adoptions are places where people are struggling financially. So They could be pockets of, great unemployment or very marginal unemployment. South Florida, quite a lot. So sometimes we see women who are choosing adoption because they don't believe in abortion, but that is not typically the profile of a birth mother. I would say 75% of the women in this country who are placing children through private agencies voluntarily are women who already have children. So they may have two children that they're struggling to raise, and they know that if they bring a baby home, they will upset that very delicate financial balance that they have, or they can't pay for childcare, or they can't leave their job. Or they may have two children who've been removed by the state where they live because they haven't been able to adequately care for them. And they're working towards reunification with those children that they already know and they love. And they know, again, that having another child in the home is just going to make it harder for them to be reunited with those children. So that, I would say that those are 75% of the women who are placing babies in this country. And it's maybe 25% who are what many people, I think, who come to adoption, who are just starting to learn about adoption, are thinking are birth parents, which would be, single women, young women, students. We rarely see those moms nowadays. And as everybody knows, there's no longer a stigma associated with being a single parent or being a young parent. And oftentimes grandmothers and aunts will step in to help. So we're not seeing those women very often at private agencies. The other reason why we're seeing fewer is because, and particularly in Massachusetts, is because for quite a while now, everybody's had health insurance. This is the good news. So access to contraceptives, access to abortion, and we're just not, we're not seeing the same numbers. We also did kind of see during COVID, we did see a slowdown. I think people were out less, and so we were seeing smaller numbers of babies being placed. But once you've finished your home study and you're considered a waiting parent, the important thing is to find resources, find a way for your profile, which could be either online or it could be a Snapfish book or a MacBook, something that you've put together with pictures of your life, how that can be seen by an expectant mom. So that is really how birth parents will meet you. And these books, if you haven't seen them, you could sort of look around online and you will see some. And actually, I think someone told me that Snapfish actually has an adoption book template now. So these books, they're not going to have your last names. They're not going to have your addresses. Not that you're not going to have an open adoption. You might end up with an open adoption because you want one. But the idea is that you start the process not fully open. So however, no names, no addresses, but they are very personal because in them, you're going to have pictures of your life. Women are going to look at these books and they're going to try to imagine their child in your life, in your home. So people include pictures of their travel, if that's important to them, their pets, how they celebrate holidays, your home, the playgrounds near your house. If you already have children, you might include pictures of your children. So there's, a lot of, and there's text as well. So you talk a little bit about your values and, what you're looking forward to doing with your child. You will do a book that is, I'm sure, authentic and unlike anyone else's. But that is how birth parents are going to meet you. That's going to be their first impression. So you have told your social worker, who has included in your home study a great deal of detail about who the child is that you are hoping to adopt. So that is your piece. Someone will be working with an expectant mom and maybe her partner, Although I have to say, probably half the time or close to half the time, we do not have involved fathers. So it's unusual to have a lot of information, particularly medical information about a baby's father, but maybe about half the time we see that. Um, so just as you have told us who the child is that you're hoping to adopt, someone who is working with an expectant mom is going to ask her, what have you thought about if you were going to place your child for adoption? What would you be looking for in a family? And sometimes women have very specific ideas about the family that they would like to place their child with. Sometimes I'm always astounded, but sometimes a woman will say to me, I want to see the books or the profiles of the families that have waited the longest, which I always think is such a generous um, thought. Other times, women have very specific requests, and I have a story that I tell because it was fascinating to me. This is a woman that actually I worked with her twice. She placed twice through our agency, 8 years apart. But the first time that I worked with her, she said to me, I don't care what the religion is of the family. I don't care if they're, gay or straight. I don't care if they have other children. What really matters to me is that it be a family that will allow the child to choose their own religion. And which was fascinating to me because for many families, that's, if you join our family, this is how we worship, or we don't, or so. But the reason it was important to this young woman is that she was very socially awkward. She was estranged from her family. She's still estranged from her parents, actually. But she said the one thing that they had done, which she thought was wonderful, was that when she was, maybe in middle school, her parents gave her permission to explore congregations in her community, even though they were practicing, their own religion. They said, you know what, if you don't like this, you look around. So she did. And by doing that, she found a Christian youth group in her community. And she said to me, if I had not had those people, I would not have survived high school, because that was the only place I felt comfortable. And that was where those were my friends. And I would like to think that if my son is at all like I am, that this is a family that will allow him to find his people. And which was, it was very important to her. And we were able to find a number of families, maybe 5 that we were working with at the time, that all of whom had very, open and similar ideas about faith. And she chose a family, and they're out there now parenting, and certainly we're not checking up on them, but we know that that's a family that that is allowing that boy to find his way and supporting him in whatever it is that he needs to do to find his people. So that was a very specific thing. So I guess maybe some of you, it's surprising to know that birth parents really kind of drive the process. They're the ones who were making the choice. You have the right to certainly say, I don't want my book to be shown, or now that I know this information, I'm really not interested in this match. But ultimately, you have to be chosen by a birth parent. So when you're considering whether you want to move forward in a match, you are entitled to know everything that the agency knows about your potential match, about the birth mother, the birth father, except identifying information. So you won't have last names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, unless you, over time, in the process, you create an open adoption plan with them. But initially, you will have the opportunity to review medical records, prenatal records, assuming that she's gotten prenatal care. And sometimes we have healthy women who have healthy babies who get no prenatal care. But you will have an opportunity to see all of those things and to decide whether or not you are willing to move forward on a match. I think that I'm going to jump back a little bit. When you're thinking about um, what are some of the attributes and situations that you're comfortable with your child, um, the more open you can be and the more comfortable you are with a range of either, medical risks, drug exposure, um, you know, lack of, medical history or prenatal records, though that spreads a wider net for you because you would then have more situations to consider. Doesn't mean that you'd have to accept any of them, but you would hear about more situations. And I always think about, one of the things that we ask families, are you open to a woman who smokes cigarettes throughout the pregnancy? And I know everybody's probably cringing now, thinking that a pregnant woman would smoke cigarettes, but birth mothers often do. So if you had said, in speaking to your social worker, we're not comfortable, cigarettes are outside of our comfort zone, that's fine. But you might not hear about a situation where a woman is, um, in all other respects, might be healthy and be a great match for you, but she happens to smoke cigarettes. So we ask people to really kind of push as much as you're comfortable pushing around some of the things that are acceptable to you. There certainly are cases where there is no medical risk, but they are rare these days. Um, we see them sometimes, but not a lot. Um, so as you're thinking and learning about some of the risk factors and some of the issues that we're seeing in domestic infant adoption, the more open you can be about it, the more quickly you're going to move through the process and the more options you'll have. That said, you have to do what you feel comfortable doing. And we would not ever want anybody saying, oh, yes, we're open to that, and then not feeling ready for whatever it is that that child brings. So it's important to be, forthright about where you stand. So your book's been, let's assume now that your book or your profile online has been seen by an expectant mom, and she has chosen you. You've reviewed her medical information and you're comfortable with a match with her, and she's chosen you. What has been happening for many years is that, assuming that the expectant mom would like to, is there's usually a meeting. And if your birth mom is in Florida and you can't get down there, maybe you'll do a Zoom call or FaceTime call that's facilitated by a social worker who's working with the birth mom. But if you can get to wherever it is that she is, you're going to have a meeting, and it's usually going to be a meal where you're going to just be together. And again, a lot of people think, oh, well, then that must be open adoption. It's not really open adoption, because unless you are sharing identifying information and agreeing to have direct contact after placement, which many people do now, but it isn't always the case. So meetings typically happen before the baby arrives. And then families, if you're lucky enough to have a baby born in your home state, you will be at the hospital as quickly as you can. If the expectant mom wants you there if she has a planned C-section, she wants you there. You're going to do everything you can to be there. If she wants you to come after she's left the hospital so that you can care for the baby there, then you're going to do that. Something that I've seen in the last 8 or 10 years, which is wonderful, is that if there is an empty room on the postnatal floor, you are going to be offered a room in the hospital, and they'll feed you and they'll take care of you. Nurses and doctors love having adoptive families at the hospital so that they can teach you all the things that they would teach you if you had given birth to this child. So it's an opportunity to really become an expert on your child before they're discharged from the hospital. So if there's no medical reason for babies to stay in the hospital, they're typically discharged at 48 hours. If there are medical reasons for a baby to stay, they'll stay, and you'll have the opportunity to stay as well. It doesn't always happen, and even during COVID, it's been happening. But if there's not a room, if it's a busy time on the floor, you will not be offered that. that room, but I would say 75 or 80% of the time now we are seeing our family staying in the hospital with the child. So what happens next are surrenders when birth, and that is the point at which in Massachusetts we call them surrenders or relinquishments, the point at which birth parents are able to sign legal documents terminating their rights. There is no uniformity in adoption law in this country. And so it's every state has their own way of doing things. So I could tell you about Massachusetts, but if your baby's going to be born in Florida, you're going to follow the law in Florida. So I will tell you that in Florida, expectant moms, or now birth moms, can sign at 48 hours after birth. And fathers can be served in advance, and they have 30 days. You can even serve them before the baby's born. In Massachusetts, surrenders cannot be signed until the 4th day after the baby's born. So that's the way we do it in Massachusetts. Sometimes families in Massachusetts, if your baby is born here, you might be asked to take a baby home for 2 days if they've been discharged at 48 hours, and the surrender will be signed on day 4. Every agency in Massachusetts has a private foster home, so that if there's any risk or concerns about that possibly this surrender is not going to happen, we will use our private foster home to protect you, so you don't fall in love with a baby that might not become your child, and also to give birth parents the opportunity to really think about their decision without feeling obligated to you. So if they know their baby's being well taken care of in foster care, so they can really sort out maybe some of the things they hadn't thought about in advance. So because we want to place babies for whom that's the best plan. And sometimes in counseling, we hope that in counseling leading up to the birth, we've really examined all the options, so that if it's possible for a child to be raised in their biological family, that's what we would want, that's what we would support. And if not, then we will support the adoption plan. So that's the important piece of counseling with birth parents, which is it's a challenging thing. I think I've got just a little bit more time. I want to finish up so that there's time at the end for questions. So it's interesting what happens when those surrenders are signed is that the legal custody goes to the adoption entity. So if I'm working with a birth mother in Massachusetts, my agency gets legal custody and I give you physical custody. If you're working with a lawyer in Indiana, they're getting legal custody when the birth mother signs, you're getting physical custody for a period of time, which is called the post-placement supervisory period. So basically, in Massachusetts, it's 6 months. In Florida, it's 90 days. But it's a period of time where you will be visited by your home study social worker. They'll come out 3 times and have a cup of coffee. And it's probably the most fun that adoption social workers have, to get to see you at home with your child. And then they write reports. And when those reports have been written, then your agency or your lawyer can apply for a court date to go in and finalize your adoption. So in Massachusetts, because our courts are slow, even though we can request a court date at 6 months, we don't usually get into court until your child's probably 9 months old. Does not mean that birth parents are in play, because birth parents signed long ago. In every state, their rights have already been terminated. But what it means is that you have an ongoing relationship with the agency that has legal custody, or the lawyer that has legal custody of your child, until you go to court. And once you go to court, then it is as though you had given birth to this child. In fact, a new birth certificate is issued with your names on it, and the name that you've given your child. So technically, nobody really thinks about this, but technically, during those months before you go into court, the child's name is whatever the name the child had in the hospital. Nobody knows that. When you bring your child home and set up that first pediatrician's visit, you're going to register your child by the name you've given your child and the name that your child will have. But technically, the child's name is not been changed to your last name, if in fact the child has the birth mother's last name, until you go to court. So that's kind of a very quick um, travel through the process. Right now, I would say that most agencies, if you talk to most agencies and call around, and you should do your due diligence. There are a lot of places to talk to, and you should either go to orientations if they have private or group orientations, talk to the agencies. Most places are going to probably tell you 1 to 2 years. Things have been a little slower, as I said, because of COVID. Cost is one of the most horrifying parts of adoption now. Private adoption, whether through a lawyer or an agency, is sort of a range. I would say probably from anywhere from $40,000 to $55,000 right now. And it doesn't mean you have to open your bank account and say, okay, we'll pay whatever. Just as you're going to look at medical records for a child and before you decide to accept a match, you're also going to look at a budget. So whether it's your agency, you know what your agency's cost is. You're also going to be paying in that number that I just gave you is included reasonable living expenses for your birth mom. So we as adoptive parents are able to help pregnant women with reasonable pregnancy related expenses. And it could be as little as $2,000, or it could be as much as $12,000, depending on the match that you accept and who you're working with, who's providing the services to that mom. And that just as the cost is high, there is also some financial risk, because we can do all this work with expectant moms, and you can develop a wonderful relationship, great rapport with, a meeting beforehand and phone calls. But she's not obligated to follow through with that plan. She can change her mind up until the time that she signs. And that means that sometimes those living expenses, whether it's $2,000 or $10,000, if that's been spent paying her rent and her groceries, and I filled somebody's oil tank twice during the winter. If we've paid for all those things, she's not obligated to move forward with the plan, and she could decide to take the baby home. And then if the money's been spent, the money is gone. So that's the financial risk piece of domestic infant adoption. I would say right now, the big issues are medical issues, so some medical risk issues, and the financial risk piece. Now, there are a lot of grant and loan possibilities for people who need them. I can let you know, some of them are great. We've had families get $15,000 grants, and we certainly know of some interest-free loans as well. So there are ways that you can get some help with adoption financing. You can't apply for any of these until you have an approved home study, however. So I didn't talk about openness. I want to really quickly talk about openness, and then I want to leave time so that you can send me your questions in the chat. Openness is sort of a continuum, I think. It's very rare for us to have a fully closed adoption these days. Very occasionally, maybe once every 3 years, we'll have a woman who comes to us who says, I need to have a fully closed adoption. That's just what I want. And often there are women who come from countries where there is nothing comparable to the way we do adoption in this country. And so if that's her wish, we certainly will try to accommodate. If a family wants a fully closed adoption, you're probably going to have a very long wait. I think that, the research indicates that openness seems to be a healthier way to raise a child in adoption. So you will not find an adoption professional anywhere who does not support open adoption. Well, there's something called semi-open adoption. Semi-open adoption is, where you've met, you had those opportunity to meet over dinner before the baby was born, and maybe you saw each other in the hospital again. But any contact after placement is mediated through an agency, through a lawyer. So you're sending updates, at regular intervals, photos, letters, but they're going through someone else. And if something's coming back, same thing. And then fully open adoption, which I think is probably the majority of adoptions now have some element of full openness. Many families are exchanging cell phone numbers so that you can, a birth mother might send a text message to you saying, oh, I'd love to see his Halloween costume. Send me a picture. And you might send a picture, or you might, you might take a little video of that first step and choose to send it to her. And sometimes it's informal in that way, and sometimes it's formalized. So you have an agreement where you're sending updates directly. But what makes it fully open is you've shared your identities, and your contact is direct after placement. So there's not necessarily an intermediary. We have a lot of families who get together and see each other for visits after placement. I have a family that in the summer, the adoptive family goes to the birth family's house in the Berkshires, and they have a picnic with, big extended family picnic. I think the people who are happiest with fully open adoption are people who can kind of think of birth family as their own extended family, because that is, as you're raising this child that is, the product of all of you. So I think families are most comfortable with that. So everybody I know today is probably, this is overwhelming, and I applaud all of you for exploring adoption. I know it's not always easy. And a lot of the things I'm talking about may sound odd, but as you move through the process and learn more about it, I think that many of the openness and variety of different things will not seem strange to you. And if you talk, you can certainly ask your agencies if you can talk to families who are living in open adoption, and to hear more about that. There's great, wonderful, reading that you can do to prepare. And as I said, it is seen by professionals, adoption professionals and mental health professionals, as the healthier way to parent a child through adoption. So I think that's it for me. I think that's all the time I get. So I'm here. If you want to put your questions into the chat, I will do my best to answer them. And thank you for listening. I wish you all luck. It's a great adventure.